Thank you for joining us. Today I have a short presentation about how we can use Google Apps to deliver instruction online. And by using a combination of Google Apps, we can really capture a lot of the classroom experience in a pretty good way. So we'll jump right in. First of all, to overview the apps, the use of Google Apps would allow us to recreate the classroom experience online fairly well. And Google Apps are the best option for this sort of short-term contingency plan because Google Apps are fast, they are familiar, and they are free. So let's go into a bit of detail about that. First of all, Google Apps are fast because apps such as Google Drive, Docs, Sheets, Sites are already in use, for example, at Wake Tech throughout ESL and our CCR department. Furthermore, with one Gmail account, a little bit of hands-on training, and a few app downloads, we are able to interact with students similarly to the way that we do in class. Next, Google Apps are familiar. As we've found in the past week, many, if not most, really, of our instructors and our students already have Gmail accounts. And those who do not have Gmail accounts can create their own account in just a few minutes. It's a very clear and simple process. Google Apps are accessible on any smartphone or any computer. As long as we're online, we can use these apps through an internet browser or from a mobile device. And third, Google Apps are free. One free Gmail account will give you access to Google Drive, which provides 15 gigabytes of storage, which should be more than enough to host a few weeks of class resources. Hopefully, this quarantine will only last a few weeks. What we find now is that with the free version of Google Hangouts, we can have up to 10 people join a conference call at the same time. So what this means for instructors is that we can schedule class with 9 students at a time. Now, what we've seen in this week is that some of the companies who provide these teleconferencing services are expanding the availability of some of the higher tier functions of these platforms. For example, Google has announced that they plan to make the Google Suite level of their applications available, particularly to businesses and educational institutions that are relying on these telecommuting applications. So fingers crossed, we may see a possible expansion in the coming days that would allow up to 150 or 250 participants on one conference call. With that higher tier, we may also see functions such as the ability to record sessions become available, as well as the ability to mute particular participants remotely. With the free version, we do only have the ability to mute ourselves, but as you understand, it may be useful for a facilitator to be able to mute the microphone of a student or participant whose background noise becomes a distraction. So the first step in making all of this work is to unify the class on Gmail accounts, right? So everyone needs a Gmail account, but even remotely, we can assist students in setting up Gmail accounts. What I recommend from that point is that instructors or facilitators compile a list of student accounts and create a contact list for their class. So for example, I have done so with a Google Sheet for participants in some workshops that I did yesterday, and for today I've got an abbreviated list that I'll be using for demonstrations. But I certainly recommend making a Google Sheet, for example, that has student names and Gmail addresses in one quick and easily accessible place. What this allows me to do is come right in here and copy all of the Gmail addresses at the same time so that I can paste them where they need to go. And I'll show you some of the places where we will use those in a moment. So we were talking about Google Apps. They're fast, they're familiar, and they're free. We know that we want to align everyone with a Gmail account. And what we were moving into next was demonstrating how to schedule classes as calendar events in Google Calendar. So I'm backing out of the presentation, coming to my Gmail home screen, my inbox, looking up at the top right corner where I have the waffle to select for Google Apps, and then opening Google Calendar. I hope everyone is still with us at this point. So I'm going to demonstrate how to create a class as a Google Calendar event. So let's say I want my class to start now at 2:30 today, March 18th. Right? So I'm going to click at the 2:30 time slot. And right off the bat, I know I need to enter some details about this class. So I will click More Options. This gives us the full screen to enter in the details about the class. So first, I need to choose a title for the class. So I'll say Sample ESL Class, or let's say Online ESL Class, even better. Next, moving down the screen, in the next line here, I can specify the time that the class meets. So it begins at 2:30. Let's say this is a 90-minute class, so it will end at 4 p.m. Just below that, I'll find this cell that reads does not repeat. This is where we can set either an all-day event or we can set the recurrence for the event. So if I click on this, I get a menu. If I don't click on this, this means I will create only one class at one time on one day. But let's imagine that this class meets Monday through Thursday from 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. When I click on that option and click Custom, I get this option to create a custom recurrence. And I want this class to repeat every week, every 1 week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is already selected, and Thursday. Now, I may also want to set an end date for this class. So, assuming that we'll be all back to work in our classrooms on April 6th, I can select April 5th as my end date, or let's say I can say April 2nd, since that is the final Thursday before we'll go back to the classroom. So I'll set my end date for April 2nd, 2020. Now I'm done setting my recurrence, and I'll click Done. Moving on down the left side of the screen, we'll come down to this icon. It looks like a small video camera, and we have this option next to it that says Add Conferencing. Here, I'm going to click the Add Conferencing button. It pops out with the option to select Hangouts. Hangouts is Google's version of a teleconferencing application. It's very simple to use, and we'll demonstrate that in a few moments, but I want to select this, Hangouts. Now, these notification settings I don't have to deal with. They default to sending emails to myself and participants and notifications to myself and participants. Moving over to the right here, we have a tab for guests and a small window where I can enter the guests I want to participate in my class. So again, I'm going to come over to my handy class list. I can copy all of my participants' Gmail addresses at once. I can paste them into this window and hit enter. Now we can see my 3 participants plus myself included in the guest list. Moving on down here, we see guest permissions. Now, there are a few things that we may not want students to be able to do with a class. First of all, we may not want students to modify the event. That would be to change the time or remove people from the guest list, right? So we leave this unselected. That is the default. Looking down below, we have this option to invite others, and I will deselect this because currently with the 9 student capacity of Google Hangouts, 10-person total, we don't want students to invite anyone else to the Hangout. We want only registered students to participate in the class, and facilitators need to control that list of guests. Finally, we come to this large gray area to the left where we can add a description to the class or to the event. And we might say class meets Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 2:30 to 4 o'clock. I also have the option to attach documents here. So if I click this attachment icon here, I then get a menu to select items from my Google Drive. It starts with recent. I can view my drive. I can find files shared with me. I also have an option to upload files from my computer. So let's imagine that I have a handout and a worksheet that I would like students to have access to before the start of class. I can select this file here and add it to the event. Now, the way that I have set this up, my guests will receive an email with a link to join a Hangout at a specified time. They will also receive this handout and worksheet as an attachment to that email. So now I'm all done. I've set the title, I've set the duration of the class, I've set the recurrence of the class, I've specified that I want to meet on Google Hangouts, I've entered my participants in the guest list, I've set my guest permissions, I've added a description, and I've attached a file. These are all options that we have through Google Calendar, and I'm ready to click Save. Now I'm prompted to, it says, would you like to send invitation emails to Google Calendar guests? And yes, I would. I want my students to receive that email with a link to join the class. So I'll click the blue Send here to the far right. Now that has sent an invitation to my 3 participants. And looking here on Google Calendar, I now see my online ESL class shows up today at 2:30 to 4 o'clock. It repeats on Thursday of this week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday through the next week, continuing on until April 2nd, the end date that I had selected, and it stops after that. In each of these calendar events, I can click on this and see the details of the class, the title, the meeting time, the recurrence, an option to join the Hangout, the guest list, and the attached files. Coming back to today's session, I can click here, and I'm going to head into this Hangout now to demonstrate a few features. Well, we'll get to that in a moment, I think, because first I want to talk through a few other things in the presentation. For those of you who may need to direct students through creating Gmail accounts to participate, this can be done very simply by going to gmail.com. For someone who does not use Gmail, they'll show this screen at first, the one on the left, and they'll have the option to click this Create Account button. When you click this button, it brings you to the next screen where you can enter your first and last name. Google can generate a username for you, or you can select one of your own. Then it's time to select a password and confirm that. What I often advise to students is that after entering the password here, they click this Show Password icon and then take a photo of this page. This just allows them to keep this saved in one more place in case they forget their password. After this screen, it advances to a screen where you will enter your birth date and a phone number. Google sends you a confirmation number to the phone number and then logs you straight into Gmail. So let's talk a bit about Google Hangouts. Google Hangouts is Google's video conferencing application. It's very simple. So when you create that calendar invite, students will receive an email invite with a link to join the Hangout. That Hangout will open in a Hangouts app on a mobile device, or on a computer, it opens up in a new browser window. The Hangouts app is free to download and install, and if you click the link from the email, you are automatically prompted to download the app. It just pops right up on the screen with the Get button. Hangouts take place in a simple interface that allows video, which is optional. We can turn off the camera. Audio controls. For the free version right now, we can only control our own microphone. It does allow screen sharing and document and file sharing through Google Drive. So now we'll demonstrate some of those features of Google Hangouts. And I just want to be sure everyone can still see my screen. So I'm going to come back to the Google Calendar event, click on the class for today, and I'll click Join Hangouts. It says, you are the first one here, and I will join the Hangout. Now I have invited 3 participants who should have their invitation sitting in their email inbox. But basically, from this point, I would like to give an on-screen tour of what we see in Google Hangouts. Looking up at the top right corner of the screen in Google Hangouts, we have the option to invite participants. Here I can enter Gmail addresses and click the invite button to invite people to the current Hangout. I can also click this button to copy a link, which I might drop into an email that I send to the entire class. This is just a fail-safe in case we have people who are having difficulty joining the session. Moving on to the right here, we have a small camera icon. This will toggle back and forth between forward and rear-facing cameras. Next, we have this stack of 3 dots. This will open our menu. The top item here, if it's difficult to see, the top item is to share your screen. This is by far the most useful tool in Google Hangouts, and I'll demonstrate how that can be used a bit later. We also have an option for full screen. We can open our chat. We can view some settings. Settings are pretty limited in the free version to audio and video selection, input selection, output selection. We also have the option to reduce the quality of our video, and this can be done to preserve some bandwidth if we're having trouble maintaining a clear connection. Continuing our tour around the screen, we come down to our participants who show up as small icons along the bottom row. We can select them to look at them, for example, as they speak. Here in the center of the screen, we have a large red button to end the call. It ends the call only for yourself. It does not end it for the entire group. To the left, we have the toggle mute, and to the right, we can activate and deactivate our camera. I have mine deactivated right now because, as I mentioned before, it was competing with the GoToWebinar application and wasn't working correctly. Continuing over to the left side of the screen, we find this little speech bubble icon. Now, if I let my mouse sit still for a few seconds, we'll notice that all of these controls will disappear from the screen. But then as I mouse in one direction or the other, this speech bubble will pop out. And if I click on that speech bubble, I get this dark rectangle that extends from the left of the screen and this green line on which I can write something into the group chat. As I enter into the chat, what I say pops up as a speech bubble and then evaporates. Now, let's say a student missed what I said before it evaporated. You can click this Show Messages button, and this will open up the complete chat log for the session. Now, one important thing to note at this point is that the chat log displays all messages sent from the point in time that that participant entered the Hangout. So if, for example, you shared a link before a student entered your class, then you may need to share that link again for that student. So this completes our on-screen tour of Google Hangouts features, and we'll continue now to talk about what we can do in the application. Looking back here, this is a screenshot of what we see when we go to hangouts.google.com. This is just one more way to initiate a call. When we go here, we can start a call that starts at that moment. This is not where we set up a recurring call. Again, I recommend doing that type of setup through Google Calendar. Now, once we're inside the application, here are a few screenshots. The upper right corner displays what we see on a desktop or in an internet browser. And the bottom left shows what we see in a mobile platform, of course, turned in landscape view. We can share items from Google Drive by dropping links into the chat of the Google Hangout. And we can also share our screen in the Google Hangout and, for example, display a blank Google Doc as a virtual whiteboard. So what I'd like to do now is demonstrate how we can share our attendance sheets as documents in the Google Hangout. This is really the important part of this presentation because this is what allows us to remain in compliance by documenting student time in class. So we'll back out of the presentation again and we'll go to my Google Drive. Again, starting from Gmail as my starting point, I'll come back to the waffle here and that expands and I'll select Drive. Now, what I have done is I've actually already set up a folder, and I have my Wake Tech folder here in Google Drive, and I have a folder here for my sample online class. And then within my class folder, I have individual folders for each day of class. So this allows Google Drive to function as our repository for class materials, as our makeshift LMS, if you will. And so for each day, I have a separate folder. Within each day's folder, I can keep my class materials. For example, I can house my lesson plan for that day of class. I can have my class presentation saved as Google Slides. I can have my handouts and worksheets saved as Google Docs. And most importantly for this demonstration, I can have my sign-in sheets saved as Google Sheets. So I'm going to click on this day's sign-in sheets and demonstrate how we can share this with students so that they sign in and sign out of class when they enter and when they exit, and we can document and prove their time in the class. So I've opened up my sign-in sheet and I want to share this with my students. So I'm going to come here to the top right corner where we have this big green share button. I'll click that. And once this menu loads, I know that I need to click the Advanced options in the bottom right corner. Now here I have a link to copy, and down below I have the options to decide who has access. And I want to change these settings because right now only I have access. So I'll click Change. Now here we have some security options for link sharing. The first is on, that this is public on the web. We don't want that. Next is on, anyone with the link can access. Well, this would allow me to share the document with students, but it would show those students as anonymous users. So I still don't want this. I want to turn link sharing off and share this with specific people. So now I've selected off, and I'll click Save. Now it's time to decide or enter who I want to share this with. So I'll come back to my handy class list. I'll copy all 3 of my participants' Gmail addresses from there and paste them right here. Now, before I hit enter, I want to deselect this checkbox that says notified people. So if I don't deselect that, that's going to send an email to all of my students saying, Paul Drosnes has invited you to edit today's sign-in sheet. And I don't want to do that. I want my students to come to the Google Hangout to access the sign-in sheet. This allows the Google Hangout essentially to function as the doorway of the classroom. We require students to enter the classroom to sign in, and so we require students to enter the Hangout to sign in on the virtual sign-in sheet. I will also select these 2 checkboxes down below. The first, if it's difficult to read, says prevent editors from changing access and adding new people. I don't want my students to change access. And the second says disable options to download, print, and copy. So I want this document to be as secure as possible. So I will check these 2 boxes. The default is that they will not be checked. So you will want to do this. All right, so now I'm all done. I've entered the people that I want to share this with, and I've set my security settings. Now I can select my link and I can click OK. I will be prompted. It says, am I sure I want to skip sending invitations? And I am. Again, I don't want my students to get an email notification to edit this in case I'm doing this before class, as I should. So I'll click OK. Now we can see that my participants have been added to the list. And I'll click Done. Now I can return to my Hangout, come down to the chat, and I can paste the link to this sign-in sheet into the chat. And my participants can click on that link, and that will bring them to the sign-in sheet. And we'll watch as they do so and enter here. Okay, so we can see that we have 2 of 3 entering, and they show up in the top right of the screen. All right, everybody's in. So they show up in the top right of the screen. They're identified with their name and their Gmail address here. And then I'll ask them each to sign in on the sheet, which we can see they're doing now. Once we enter our sign-in time, and as soon as we select another cell, the edits we've made to a cell become visible. So now to demonstrate what makes this work to keep us in compliance, looking up here at the top of the screen, we can see that there is this gray line that says last edit was made seconds ago by Michael Ellis. And this is a link, so I can click this link. What this does is it opens the version history for this sign-in sheet. And once this loads, you'll see along the right side of the screen, we have an edit log. And we can expand this
And once we expand it, it will show an itemized edit log for each user and any changes they have made to the document. It will also color code the edits that they have made to the document. So for example, we can see Janine Maldonado has made edits to these two cells at exactly 3:04 p.m. And we can see that Michael Ellis has made an edit to this cell at exactly 3:04 p.m. So this allows us to maintain a record of who made changes to the sign-in sheet, and thereby allows us to prove that students are signing in their own hand as they would on a paper sign-in sheet with a pen in the classroom. So this record follows this document throughout history, right? This doesn't go away. And so we can save this sign-in sheet and we can save this edit log or this version history to provide proof of students' time in class. Now, this is the very important part to keep us in compliance. And so much of the other things I will demonstrate are flexible, but this is not, right? We want to make sure we get this right by sharing this document with students in the appropriate way. Again, by clicking share, entering their Gmail addresses, not notifying them, and then sharing this link through the Google Hangouts chat. An alternative to this, if you have somebody who is struggling to access the chat, right, we may also copy the link from the sign-in sheet. And again, we might send this in an email to all students in the class as the class begins. This is just one more place where that link to the sign-in sheet will appear for students to access. Now, at the end of class, imagine that class has ended, and I now want my students to sign out. So I'll ask that they find the out column and enter the time that we're leaving. And we can see their entries popping up, right? And of course, this all appears in the edit log that these particular users have made these changes to the document at these specific times. So now class has ended, my students have signed out. I want to lock down this document so that the students cannot access it after class. So I'll come back up to the share button. I will click advanced again, and I will start to remove my students from the permissions list. I'll save that and I'll click done. Now each of my students will be seeing on their screen that their access to this sheet has expired and they have been booted out of it. So at this point, this document is secure. My students cannot access it and edit it anymore. I can share this with intake specialists for processing, and I can go ahead and enter my web attendance. So this demonstrates how we can use Google Sheets to provide that secure proof of student time in class. So I'll return now to the presentation, and we'll continue to look at a few other features. As I mentioned before, in Google Drive, we can use this to set up folders and host various class materials and use different Google apps to achieve different purposes, right? So we can have our lesson plan as a Google Doc, our class presentation as Google Slides, sign-in sheets as Google Sheets, worksheets can be Google Docs, and we can also use a virtual whiteboard in the classroom, which I do recommend. I teach online with an interface similar to Google Hangouts every day, And I do find that using a virtual whiteboard is a really great tool. So again, just here in my Google Drive folder for today's class, I have a blank Google Doc, which I've titled my virtual whiteboard. And here I can write examples on the board, demonstrate spellings or whatever we need to. Just as we would write on the board in a classroom, we can write on the board in here. Now this doesn't need to be restricted to only me. I can also share this with my students. And by clicking the blue share button in the top right corner, I can again copy my students' Gmail addresses, drop them right into here. And this time, I don't need this to be so secure. I can leave this as anyone with the link can edit. So I can send that to the students. I can copy the link here. I can drop the link into my Google Hangout. And students can now click on that link and they'll have access to this virtual whiteboard. And this is a tool I use every day in class. It allows me to reinforce what I'm saying to students and what we're talking about. It also allows me to keep a record of what was covered in class if I need to refer to it for notes. And it's also something I can share with students after class. And this is often proven to be a valuable resource that students appreciate, the fact that we can save what was on the board. Okay, so I'll return to the presentation. Finally, what I'd like to do is overview some of the required apps to make this work on any platform. So, of course, all of this can be done from a computer, and all of the Google applications show up as tabs in one web browser window. So we do want to exercise some screen hygiene, being aware of what's behind us if we're sharing our camera, being aware of what is on our desktop or what is in our web browser window when we're sharing our screen. But from the mobile platform, there will be some apps that are required to participate. Luckily, all of these apps are free. They prompt you automatically to download the first time you try to use them. And once they're there, the sheets, the docs, the forms will open in those apps automatically. So the first is Gmail, right? As we said before, all participants will be required to have a Gmail account. It may be helpful to have the Gmail app downloaded so that this is kept separate from other email that may be coming to the student's device. Now, when we send those calendar invitations to students, they will show up with a link to join a Google Hangout. When students click that link from the email or from the calendar, they'll be prompted to download Google Hangouts. Google Hangouts will it'll pop up on the screen. Do you want to download and install Google Hangouts? You click yes or get, and this is free and automatic and happens quickly. Now, within the Hangout, we do share documents, like the Google Sheets for the sign-in sheet or Google Docs for the virtual whiteboard. So these will prompt participants to open them in Google Drive. You may need to download the Google Drive application. Again, it just pops right up. You click OK, and it downloads. Google Drive will open Google Docs and Google Sheets in a read-only format. So in order to edit the sign-in sheet to enter their time, they will also be prompted to download Google Sheets. Again, it's automatic, pops right up. And the same thing is true for Google Docs. So it may sound like a lot, these 5 apps, but once you've done it once, they're there, and it happens automatically from that point. Every other time, your Sheets will open in Google Sheets, your Docs will open in Google Docs. So there is a little bit of front loading that we have to do. And the first class session using this platform, it is expected that we will be teaching students how to use the platform. But that's to be expected at any level with any class. The final icon that we have here is for Google Forms. This is another very useful app offered through Google. If we come back to my Google Drive folder for this day of class, I might want to add a new folder, add new docs, add new sheets, add new slides. I got this menu just by right-clicking on the screen. Scrolling down on this menu, I get this extra pop-out next to More. And the top item here is Google Forms. I can create and share this in the folder. Google Forms is a great tool for administering assessments. I can give quizzes in class. I can give homework that I share with students before or after class. And what it allows me to do is I can title the form. I can say sample test 1, and that'll populate right there automatically. Please complete this before class, right? And then I can add questions to my test, right? I can label them question 1. I can select different types of question forms, right? I could have a short answer, paragraph, multiple choice, checkboxes, drop down, file upload. Really, there's a lot of room for creativity here. I can also add additional questions as I want. Let's say I want to reorder the questions. I can drag them around here on the screen. I can specify my multiple choice options and things like that. I can select whether or not the question is required to complete the form or the test, right? I can also import questions. I can change the title and description. I can add images or photos. I can add videos into here through YouTube. I can add different sections, right? So there's a lot of room to play around. Here we have options to change colors. We can test the student view, what it looks like when we send it to them. And I can share this with students by clicking this big purple send button. This will open up options to either send it as an email, or let's say I'm doing an in-class assessment. I click this link icon. I usually shorten the URL, copy this, and again, I can just drop this right into the chat in the Google Hangout. All right, so that concludes the demo of the applications. There is a lot of room for creativity here, and I encourage people who may be interested in using this to go ahead and try this. Go ahead and play around. Gauge your comfort level with this technology and think about how realistic this may be for your group of students. We have confirmed that by documenting student attendance with our sign-in sheets in Google Sheets, we can remain in compliance. And so we encourage anyone who's able to take these tools and run with them to do so. So I'd like to thank everybody for letting me demonstrate these tools. I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn things over back to Dan.
But really, Paul, thank you for all of the work you've done. This is all Paul's initiative. He figured this out specifically for Wake Tech and then shared it with me for approval, and I asked if we could share it with everybody. So I really appreciate what he's done and the initiative he took, that he started to figure this out last week. Paul, it was great. You were fabulous, and that's what we're saying in the comments, that you did a great job.